My name is Lucas Warren, and I am 29 years old. I work as an environmental engineer at a small consulting firm that focuses on regenerative agriculture. In most circles, it's a career people admire. In my family, it's a disappointment. I was born into the Warrens, a legacy of investment bankers and corporate strategists, where success is measured by the weight of your portfolio and the title on your business card. My parents, Gregory and Evelyn Warren, never said it directly, but I knew. I was the outlier. The failed prototype. The one who didn't fit the mold. My older sister, Vivian, was their perfect heir. She had the sharp suits, the boardroom presence, and the cold efficiency they admired. I had dirt under my nails, a passion for soil health, and a tendency to disappear into research for weeks. I was a curiosity at best, a cautionary tale at worst. The reading of my grandfather's will took place at an ornate law office in downtown Dallas. The room smelled of polished mahogany and silent judgments. I sat quietly at the long table, watching my parents beam with pride as the lawyer, Mr. Carroll, formally announced that Vivian would receive $15 million in the controlling shares of the Warren Group. When the lawyer finally turned to me, my mother's smile didn't waver. My father's voice was steady as he said, "Lucas, we know you'll find your own way. Consider this an opportunity to earn something on your own. No trust fund, no property, no shares. Just a clean dismissal wrapped in a patronizing blessing." I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I simply nodded, my throat burning, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Just as the meeting was about to conclude, another voice broke the rhythm. "There's one more document," said a man at the back of the room. It was Mr. Sanders, my grandfather's private attorney, someone the family hadn't expected to see. His voice was calm but carried enough weight to still the room. He stepped forward, holding a worn envelope sealed with my grandfather's handwriting. My mother's smile faltered. My father's fingers tensed. Vivian's eyes narrowed like she was calculating an unfamiliar risk. "This is a supplemental will," Mr. Sanders said, "written and signed by Mr. Warren in the final months of his life." The silence was electric. My parents exchanged glances, their practiced composure cracking at the edges. Vivian's fingers drummed against the table. "Mr. Sanders continued, per his instructions, Lucas is to meet me at the family's old ranch outside the city. The contents of this document concern him specifically. The ranch, a place I hadn't seen in years, left to wither just like the memories we once built there." I said nothing. I simply stood up, nodded once to the room that had already decided I didn't belong, and walked out. I didn't know then that what awaited me would unravel everything they thought they controlled. I left the law office with my pulse still echoing in my ears, the weight of that worn envelope heavy in my pocket. I didn't know what waited for me at the ranch, but I knew it would be something my family never intended me to see. They had handed me nothing, but my grandfather had left me something, and I was going to find out what. The drive out to the old Warren ranch was longer than I remembered. 5 years had passed since I last set foot on that stretch of land, but the road, with its familiar turns and fading fence posts, hadn't changed. It was the place where I once spent my summers chasing dragonflies, where the scent of wildflowers clung to the air, where my grandfather used to call me his little soil scientist. But as I pulled up the gravel driveway, it felt like arriving at a stranger's house. The paint on the farmhouse had peeled into long, brittle curls, exposing the gray wood beneath. The porch sagged slightly, as though the house had been holding its breath for years. The magnolia trees still leaned awkwardly toward the east, their branches weighed down, like they too had grown tired of waiting. I stepped out of the car and hesitated in front of the door, my hand hovering over the tarnished handle. I expected silence when the door creaked open, but instead I heard a sharp, familiar voice slice through the stale air. "So, you finally remembered this place." There she was, my grandmother, Helen Warren, her hair, now almost fully silver, was pulled tightly into a bun. Her posture was rigid, her arms crossed firmly as though she'd been waiting for a fight. Her eyes, once warm and sparkling when I was a boy, now held nothing but cold suspicion. "Grandma," I said, but the word tasted foreign on my tongue. She didn't move to hug me. She didn't even step aside. "They told me you stopped caring," she said, "that you had a new life, that you didn't want to be bothered." I took a step closer, but she didn't flinch. "That's not true," I said quietly. "I called. I came by last year. Vivian told me no one was home. She said you were too busy." Her jaw tightened, the lines around her mouth sharpening. "I was here. Lucas, I've always been here." A thick silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. "Grandpa called for you," she said, her voice breaking for just a moment before she forced it back into stone. "Every day, toward the end. He asked for you." I swallowed hard. I didn't know. I would have come. I tried. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes scanning my face for cracks, for lies. Finally, without a word, she turned and walked back into the house. I followed her through the dusty hallway, past familiar photos whose frames were now dull with time. The house felt smaller somehow, as if it had shrunk without him in it. She returned from the sitting room holding a small leather notebook, its edges frayed, its pages yellowing. She thrust it toward me. "This is the number he kept calling," she said. I took the notebook, my hands trembling as I read the digits scrawled in his precise, steady handwriting. I knew that writing. I had watched him label garden pots and file his research notes in that exact script, but this number wasn't mine. "Grandma, I've had the same phone number since college. This isn't mine. This has never been mine." Her brow furrowed, confusion cracking through her hardened expression. "They told me you changed it. They said you didn't want to be tracked down." "No," I said, my back pressing against the nearest wall for support. "They lied. They made sure I couldn't be found." Her hands shook as she lowered herself into the faded armchair by the fireplace. She looked smaller somehow, folded into herself. "They told me the funeral was at noon." I whispered, the memory hitting me like a punch to the chest. I showed up at the church. It was empty. Her face went pale. Her voice dropped to barely a breath. "The funeral was at 9. Everyone was told you didn't show up, that you didn't care." My throat tightened, my breath caught. I would have never missed his funeral. Never. She covered her mouth with one trembling hand, the weight of the realization crashing over her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The walls, the old clock, the sagging couch, they all seemed to lean into the silence, holding their breath with us. I sank down beside her, clutching the notebook to my chest as if it could somehow rewind time. "I didn't know," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I didn't know he was sick. I didn't know I was too late." Her hand found mine, thin and cold, but her grip was firm. "We know now," she said. "That's what matters. We know." We sat there for a long time, the silence between us no longer empty, but thick with grief, betrayal, and the quiet stitching of something that had long been torn. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves across the porch, their rustling a quiet reminder the truth had been buried, but it was finally starting to break through the surface. The silence from that afternoon lingered with me, even as I sat in the kitchen the next morning. My grandmother had not wasted a moment. As soon as the truth sank in that I had been deliberately erased, she picked up the old rotary phone on the wall and began dialing, her voice sharp and certain as she summoned the rest of the family to the ranch. She didn't ask. She didn't give them a choice. She told them to come. "They need to hear it," she said, her tone brooking no argument. All of it. Now. I sat at the same wooden table where my grandfather once taught me to trace tree rings, waiting for the door to creak open again. The house, with its dusty curtains and faint scent of old pine, no longer felt as suffocating as it had yesterday. It felt like a battleground. I could hear their cars pull up one by one, tires grinding on gravel, car doors slamming shut, and then the voices. My mother's saccharine greeting. Oh, I forgot how this place smells like wet wood, thinly masking her irritation. My father's calm, rehearsed muttering, I thought we resolved all this. Vivian's unmistakable sigh, sharp, clipped, dismissive. Seriously, this couldn't wait, and then came my grandmother's voice from the front room, cold and unmoved. Sit down. Mr. Sanders will be here shortly. He has something left to read. I stayed in the kitchen as instructed, tracing the grain of the wooden table with my thumb, counting the lines to keep myself steady. I could hear the shuffle of their footsteps, the scrape of chairs on the worn floorboards. I could imagine their faces impatient, curious, perhaps mildly amused at first. They didn't know I was here. They thought they had come to tie up loose ends. When the front door creaked open again, Mr. Sanders's voice entered like a blade cutting through fabric. We won't be long, but this must be done properly. My grandmother called out to me from the living room. Lucas, come in now. My heartbeat thundered in my chest as I stood. I crossed the kitchen slowly, every step deliberate, steady. When I appeared in the doorway, their reaction was instant and unguarded. My mother's forced smile froze mid-expression, her lips parting slightly as if trying to conjure an explanation. My father's hand rose to his collar, tugging it in the nervous tick I'd seen 100 times. Vivian's face went pale. She looked at me as if I'd walked straight out of a ghost story she thought she had finished writing. I didn't look away. I sat down across from them in the empty chair my grandmother had prepared. Mr. Sanders gave me a brief nod, then opened the leather folder he had brought. This, he said, is the supplemental will of Mr. Franklin Warren. It was signed and witnessed in his final months and contains specific allocations not included in the previous version. The room stiffened. To Lucas Warren, he read, I leave full managerial rights and ownership of the Franklin Warren Research Center, along with the adjoining land, all equipment, intellectual property, and funding accounts designated for the Warren Community Initiative. I heard a sharp inhale that wasn't mine. Vivian's gaze darted to our parents, her hand clenched into a fist on the table. And further, Mr. Sanders continued, the remaining financial assets, investment portfolios, and estate holdings are to be divided equally between Lucas Warren and Vivian Warren. There it was, the bomb, delivered in the quiet, precise voice of a lawyer, but it detonated just the same. Vivian shot to her feet, her chair screeching backward. What her voice cracked, laced with disbelief and rage. He gave him the research center. He gave him everything she rounded on our parents. Her finger pointed like a blade. You told me this was mine. You said if I stayed, if I did everything right, that all of it would be mine. Our father stared at the table, our mother's hands twisted tightly in her lap. Mr. Sanders raised a hand calmly. There's more. Vivian laughed bitterly, a hollow, humorless sound. Oh, there's always more. My grandmother stepped forward and handed Mr. Sanders a folded letter from her pocket. He wrote this himself, she said, and he made me promise it would be read aloud, with everyone here. The room went still. Mr. Sanders carefully unfolded the letter and began to read. My grandfather's handwriting was clear and deliberate. To my grandson, Lucas. The letter began. If you're hearing this, it means I'm no longer there to tell you in person. But know this, I never doubted you not for a single moment. His words wrapped around me like the first sunlight after a long storm. You were never the loudest, he wrote. Never the one who sought to impress for applause. But you saw the world the way I did, with quiet curiosity and stubborn hope. Vivian sank back into her chair. My mother blinked furiously. My father's jaw tensed. You built your own path, even when your family tried to erase it. They told you that you didn't belong, but you always did. You belonged to the work, to the truth. And to me, the words settled over the room like dust visible, undeniable. You were the legacy I chose. The letter continued, not because you asked for it, but because you earned it. Tears threatened to surface, but I kept my eyes forward. I remember when you asked me, at 10 years old, if the soil could remember kindness. You were right. Lucas. It can. And I hope this is my way of showing you kindness always leaves roots. When the letter ended, the room stayed frozen. Vivian's face was unreadable. My mother finally looked at me not with anger, but with something else. Perhaps the beginning of understanding. Perhaps not. It didn't matter. My grandfather had said the words I had waited my whole life to hear. Words they could never take back. The words my grandfather left behind echoed in my mind long after the letter was folded and the room emptied. They had come expecting me to vanish quietly. Instead, I was still there, and what he had given me was far more than money. It was a place, a purpose that they couldn't erase. A week later, I packed my things and moved into the Franklin Warren Research Center, the modest facility my grandfather had quietly built for me on the far end of the old ranch property. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a refurbished barn. The tin roof was dented from years of hail, the wooden beams slightly warped from the Texas sun. But inside, it held something extraordinary, a space untouched by the family's expectations, a space that waited only for me. I walked through the double doors, the scent of old lumber and new possibilities greeting me like an old friend. The lab was simple, practical. A row of work tables lined the walls, shelves filled with unopened equipment still labeled with my name. The windows faced east, welcoming the soft morning light, and in the center of the room sat a single wooden workbench. On top of it, carefully placed, was my childhood notebook, the one I thought I had lost years ago? I ran my fingers over the worn cover, remembering how I once filled it with diagrams about soil, plant cycles, and bee communication. My grandfather had kept it all this time. I wasn't going to do this alone. I reached out to two old friends, Ryan and Mia. Both had once been colleagues in university. Both had brilliant minds that didn't quite fit inside corporate boxes. Ryan, an agricultural systems specialist, had been passed over by every major research firm because he challenged outdated methods. Mia, a data scientist with a passion for rural education, had been told she was too ambitious for small communities. Like me, they had heard no more times than they cared to count. When I told them about the research center, they didn't hesitate. They packed their bags and showed up within the week. We started from the ground up, and it wasn't pretty. Our first grant application was rejected. The second was ignored. The third came with polite words that told us we were too small, too young, too unproven. Local farmers were skeptical. They'd seen too many outside researchers come and go, making promises that wilted faster than their crops. Some thought we were just another failed charity experiment. We burned through our initial budget quickly. Equipment malfunctioned, data was lost, and some days it felt like the weight of the family's legacy still hung around my neck. There were nights when I sat alone on the lab floor, wondering if my grandfather had been wrong to believe in me. But quitting was never on the table. I shifted focus. If the big funders didn't see us, maybe the local community would. I founded the Young Scientist Program, a small initiative designed for middle school students in rural areas. It wasn't glamorous. We visited rundown classrooms with broken microscopes, schools where science was reduced to dusty posters and worksheets decades out of date. We brought them kits small, manageable experiments they could run with their own hands. We showed them how to ask questions, how to test their own ideas, how to track patterns in their gardens and local streams. We didn't give them answers. We gave them curiosity, and slowly, the walls began to shift. Local farmers started stopping by, curious about the kids' projects. Teachers asked if we could help update their lesson plans. We weren't just building a lab, we were building trust. There was one boy I still think about, Benjamin. He was 12, small for his age, with glasses that slid down his nose and a voice so quiet I almost missed it the first time he asked me a question. He was obsessed with soil bacteria, a topic most adults dismissed as boring, but he filled his notebook with detailed sketches and numbers, tracking how different compost mixtures affected the crops in his family's backyard plot. When he handed me his notebook, he asked, almost apologetically, "Do you think this is good enough to show someone?" I flipped through his pages carefully. His calculations weren't perfect. His grammar wobbled, but his mind was extraordinary. "It's not just good enough, Benjamin," I told him. "It's important." His eyes lit up, a mixture of pride and disbelief. In that moment, something settled inside me, a quiet understanding that this had never been about proving myself to my family. It wasn't about winning back something they had taken. It was about creating space for people like Benjamin, for the overlooked, for the ones who were told their voices were too small. We weren't building a monument. We were planting something better. And it was starting to grow. The memory of Benjamin's quiet pride stayed with me, long after he'd graduated from the Young Scientist program. It reminded me why I was here, why I kept going even when the work was exhausting, even when it seemed like no one outside these walls cared. The lab wasn't just surviving, it was growing, becoming something none of us had fully imagined at the start. I hadn't thought about my family in a long time. They had disappeared from my life, just as they had wanted, just as I had allowed. Then, almost 2 years after the will reading, I received an email I never expected. The subject line was simple: request for visit, Vivian Warren. For a long moment, I stared at the screen, waiting for the usual surge of defensiveness, for the familiar ache in my chest to return. But it didn't. I felt calm, detached, almost. She wasn't reaching out through lawyers or threats. She wasn't contesting the will. She wasn't asking for money. She just wanted to see the lab. I could have ignored her. I could have said no. I could have deleted the email and carried on with the life I had built without her. But something told me to say yes. Not for her. Not for me. But because part of me wanted to know why she was asking now. When she arrived at the annex the following week, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the tailored suits, the sleek heels, the perfectly coordinated jewelry. Vivian stepped out of her car in plain sneakers, jeans, and an oversized navy coat that didn't seem to fit her frame. Her hair was loosely tied back, her face bare of makeup. She looked smaller somehow, less like the heir they had raised her to be. She paused when she entered the main lobby, her eyes immediately drawn to the framed portrait of our grandfather that hung above the reception desk. Her gaze softened, but her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "He always knew who you were," she said quietly. "Even when I didn't, especially when I didn't know what to say to that. So I simply nodded and gestured for her to follow me. I gave her the full tour. We walked through the greenhouse wings, where rows of drought-resistant crops had taken root in neatly plotted sections. We passed through the student learning labs, where shelves overflowed with notebooks, soil samples, and student projects still pinned to the walls. She lingered the longest by the photo display from our Young Scientist program, the smiling faces of the kids, the simple experiments, the handwritten observations. Her silence was heavy, but it didn't feel hostile. At the community garden, where local families now grew food using our methods, she stopped walking. A group of children were harvesting lettuce nearby, laughing as they compared the size of their vegetables. A mother and son measured soil moisture with one of our field kits. There was no barrier between them and the work, no sense of performance or hierarchy. Just people building something together. "I thought I would get everything," she said after a long pause, her voice low but steady. "I thought that's how it worked, that if I played the part, stayed close to the right people, followed the right rules, I would win." She turned toward me, her arms crossed tightly as if to hold herself together. But what you've built here, I couldn't have bought this. I couldn't have even imagined this. I studied her carefully, unsure of where she was leading me. I didn't come to fight you, she said. I didn't come to undo anything. Then why are you here, I asked, not unkindly. She hesitated, as if still weighing whether to say it aloud. Because I think I missed something important, and I want to be part of it. If you'll let me. I wasn't ready to forgive her. I wasn't sure I would ever need to. But she didn't ask for forgiveness. She asked to contribute. Vivian explained that she'd been working quietly as a consultant, helping young professionals build confidence in public speaking. It was something she had become unexpectedly good at, something she wanted to offer to our students, the ones who struggled to find their voices, the ones who reminded me of Benjamin, of myself. I'd like to help them, she said, almost unsure of herself. I can teach them how to present their work, how to stand in front of a crowd and still feel like they belong there. She didn't promise to make amends. She didn't offer an apology wrapped in polished words. She offered her time, her presence, and I realized that maybe that was the only real apology I would ever need. I told her yes. From that day forward, Vivian became a quiet fixture in the Young Scientist program. She never asked for credit. She didn't chase the spotlight. She just showed up. Week after week, she worked with the shyest students, teaching them how to speak with clarity, how to defend their ideas with pride. The kids called her Ms. V. And for the first time, I saw a version of my sister that didn't scare me, a version that wasn't performing, a version that was finally, genuinely there. Vivian continued showing up, week after week, each time a little quieter, a little less guarded. She helped the students find their voices, not with lectures or commands, but with patience. I watched her melt into this place, not as an outsider trying to claim it, but as someone who simply wanted to contribute, in her own way. She had chosen to stay, and in mine, I had chosen to let her. The years that followed reshaped the very core of what we were building. 4 years after that first confrontation in the old ranch house, I found myself standing on a stage in New York, beneath lights that once would have made me shrink. The National Innovation Award in Sustainable Agriculture was being handed to me, a recognition I never chased, but one that found me all the same. As I stepped forward to receive it, I reached into my jacket pocket and touched the familiar weight of my grandfather's pocket watch. The same one he carried every day, now worn smooth at the edges. It had become something more than a relic. It was a quiet anchor, a reminder of the man who first taught me that curiosity was not a defect. The ceremony passed in a blur. The applause felt distant, almost irrelevant. I no longer needed their permission to stand where I was. The research center had grown into something none of us could have predicted. We had expanded into multiple greenhouses, launched collaborative projects with universities abroad, and developed crop systems now used by thousands of farmers across drought-stricken regions. We no longer fought for credibility. We had built it. And still. I didn't hear from my parents. Occasionally, their names appeared in financial reports or charity announcements, brief reminders of the family I had once tried to earn a place within. But I no longer chased that place. I no longer reached for doors that were always meant to stay closed. The family I had now was here built from the ground up, brick by brick, trust by trust, people who chose to stay, people who didn't need a last name to stand beside me. Sometimes, Vivian and I would cross paths in the community garden. She never asked for more than what she already had here. She didn't try to rewrite the past, and I didn't ask her to. What we had was enough. Not perfect, not repaired, but honest. In the quiet evenings, after the students had gone and the fields shimmered under the soft touch of twilight, I often found myself walking to the old wooden bench my grandfather built near the edge of the property. It had weathered storms, cracked under summers, but it still stood firm. I would sit there, feeling the coolness of the wood beneath my hands, looking up at a sky wide enough to hold all the questions I used to bury. The stars stretched above me, not the ones I once glued to my bedroom ceiling, but the real ones, the ones I used to trace with my grandfather when I was a boy. Back then, I thought the sky was too far away for someone like me. Now I know better. Some nights, when the wind slipped through the trees just right, I could almost hear his voice again. Let the world come to understand the things they once dismissed. He had been right. The world did come around, eventually, and yet, somewhere along the way, I stopped needing it to. I no longer measure my worth by the seats I'm invited to or the rooms I'm excluded from. I've learned that value is not something others grant you. It's something you carry, quietly, steadily, whether anyone else sees it or not. I've stopped waiting for the voices that once dismissed me. I no longer need to prove them wrong. I no longer need to be seen by them. Some doors stay closed, and that's fine. Some people stay absent, and that's fine, too. I have built a life where I no longer need to ask for space. I take it on my own terms. I have carved out a place that feels like mine, not because it was given, but because I chose to stand in it. There is a power in walking away from what was never meant to hold you. There is a quiet strength in no longer explaining yourself. And as I rise from the bench, pocketing the watch one last time, I feel no bitterness, no weight left to carry. I simply walk forward, steady, unhurried, through the open field where the soil remembers kindness, where my roots are finally mine. Because dignity cannot be taken, and true worth never needed permission.